Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories: industrial modernisation and more market freedom. China sets out its plans for the next 5 years.
Our other headlines: in the United States, the Nasdaq opens higher after suffering its worst trading day since 2022. We'll have the story from Wall Street.
Israel's parliament votes to reject Palestinian statehood as deadly IDF attacks continue across Gaza.
And don't let Putin blackmail you. Ukraine's president warns his allies as European leaders meet at the birthplace of Britain's wartime Prime Minister, Winston Churchill.
China has been setting out its future direction. The markets are set to play a bigger role in the world's second-largest economy after a meeting of the country's third plenum in Beijing.
A number of pledges were issued by the CPC Central Committee, including modernising the country's industrial complex, cutting debt and tackling the property crisis, as well as working towards fairer income distribution. Our correspondent Li Dongning reports.
The CPC Central Committee affirmed the work of its political bureau since the second plenary session. It acknowledged China's achievements in comprehensively deepening reform since the beginning of the new era. The communiqué says the overall goal of deepening reform is to continue to improve the socialist system with Chinese characteristics and to modernize the system of governance and capacity. By 2035, China aims to finish building a high-standard socialist market economy in all respects, improving the system of socialism with Chinese characteristics and modernizing the system and capacity for governance, and basically realizing socialist modernization. All of this will lay a solid foundation for building China into a great modern socialist country in all respects by the middle of this century. The reform tasks laid out in the resolution must be completed by the time the People's Republic of China celebrates the 80th anniversary in 2029. It was stated at the session that a high-level socialist market system is an important guarantee for Chinese modernization, which requires China to give better play to the role of the market, foster a fairer and more dynamic market environment, and make resource allocation as efficient and productive as possible. In this way, China aims to unleash the internal driving forces and creativity of our society as a whole. The Central Committee also highlighted the high-quality development is the primary task in building China into a modern socialist country in all respects. It said China needs to improve the institutions and the mechanisms for fostering new quality productive forces in line with local conditions, for integrating the real economy and the digital economy. China also needs to improve its institutions and mechanisms in its service sector, infrastructure and industrial and supply chains that should be more resilient and secure. The communiqué describes opening up as a defining feature of Chinese modernization, adding that China must continue its basic state policy of opening up. It says China needs to promote reform through opening up. It explains that China should rely on its advantages as an ultra-large market and enhance its capacity for opening up through international cooperation and build a new system of open economy at a higher level. It also calls for improvement of the Belt and Road mechanism. It was also stated at the session that developing whole-process people's democracy is integral to Chinese modernization, saying China needs to ensure that principle of the people running the country is manifested in concrete and visible ways in all aspects of China's political and social activities. The communiqué says that ensuring and improving people's well-being in the course of pursuing development is a major task of Chinese modernization. It says China will improve the system of basic public services, strengthen provision of inclusive public services, meeting essential needs and ensuring basic living standards. China will work to solve problems of the greatest, most immediate and most practical concern to the people, constantly meeting people's aspirations for a better life. China also plans to improve the income distribution system, the employment first policy, and the social security system, further reform the medical and healthcare systems, and improve the systems for population development and providing related services. The communiqué says Chinese modernization is the modernization of harmony between humanity and nature. It calls for an ecological civilization system, reduced carbon emissions and mitigation of pollution in parallel with expanding green transition and promoting economic growth. And the concept, lucid waters and large mountains are invaluable assets, must be implemented more quickly. The communiqué also makes clear China's commitment to CPC's centralized, unified leadership. It stresses that Chinese modernization is the modernization of peaceful development. In foreign relations, China remains firmly committed to pursuing an independent foreign policy of peace and is dedicated to promoting a human community with a shared future. Holding dear humanity's shared values, China will pursue the Global Development Initiative, the Global Security Initiative, and the Global Civilization Initiative, and call for an equal and orderly multipolar world and universally beneficial and inclusive economic globalization. China will also participate in efforts to lead the reform and development of the global governance system and will resolutely safeguard its sovereignty, security, and development interests. The plenum also analyzed the current situation and tasks that China faces. It was highlighted that China must remain firmly committed to accomplishing the goals for this year's economic and social development. China will ensure effective implementation of macro policies, strive to expand domestic demand, develop new quality productive forces in light of local conditions, move faster to foster new drivers of foreign trade, take solid steps toward green and low-carbon development, ensure and improve the people's well-being, and consolidate and build upon achievements in poverty alleviation. The top leadership will review and assess the implementation of the current five-year plan, make sound preparations for the 15th five-year plan, which will begin in 2026. It was also stated during the plenum that China must ensure both development and security. To this end, China will implement various measures for preventing and diffusing risks in real estate, local government debt, small and medium financial institutions. Li Dongning, CGTN.
Our correspondent Li Jianhua is following the story. If you're outside China, the plenum might seem somewhat opaque. Why does all of this matter?
Well, Jamie, first the definition of plenum or plenary session. So the National Congress is held in China every 5 years, and in those 5 years, all of the Central Committee members, less than 400 of them, including permanent and alternate members, will meet 7 times each year, and each one is a plenum. The third plenum usually draws the most attention, as it usually focused on China's long-term economic strategies over the decades. Here are some of the most important plenums, third plenums, that were considered the turning point of China's economies. The first one was in 1978, when former Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping introduced the reform and opening up policy in China that kick-started the country's fast economic growth. And the second one was in the 1990s. The plenum decided to build a so-called socialist market economy, paving the way for the development of a market-oriented economy, including privatizing some of the state-owned enterprises. And fast forward to 2018, it focused on structural reforms, particularly in state-owned enterprises and also the financial sector.
So we're going to talk a bit more about this later in the programme, but the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer hosting European leaders here today, and European leaders will be watching this plenum closely, won't they?
Yes, you're right. And Keir Starmer said earlier, a week ago, said that he's going to be robust with China, whatever that means. But China is the UK's 5th largest trading partner. So if we look at China-EU trade relations, so they are marked by a complex interdependence. The trade volume between China and the EU surpassed $800 billion US. comprising about 15% of the total trade of the EU with other countries. It was only second to the trade ties with the United States. And the 1,700 companies from the European Union are now operating in China. So everyone is watching what new policies that China would roll out that probably would be beneficial for their business in China right now. And the EU is very, very interested in how these reforms might affect market access, trade regulations, and the overall business environment in China right now. The business professionals and also politicians are wondering, can we do business in China right now? And Europe wants to have a level playing field in the Chinese market. And China said in the package we learned just now that it will continue its basic state policy of opening up. But if we look at the current EU-China relations, the EU is well aware of its strategic dependencies on China. So that is why we see that EU slammed additional tariffs on China-made electric vehicles starting the 4th of July, and China has launched some investigations into EU's exports to China right now. So we do see some tension at this point. So the EU is keeping a close eye on China's economic reforms and policies and fine-tuning its own China policies.
Zhenhua, thank you very much. Our correspondent Li Zhenhua.
Well, Jack Perry is chair of the 48 Group Club, a London-based organisation dedicated to promoting trade between China and the UK. I asked him whether geopolitical tensions are affecting international companies doing business in China.
When you're there on business delegations, you don't feel it at all. And you feel hunger, especially from the UK side, trying to explore what's possible in China. We just recently went to Beijing when we signed a strategic agreement with Beijing Economic Technology Development Zone for biotech and biopharmaceuticals. So we took Christopher Evans there, the chairman of Ellipsis. And Ellipsis is a cancer development company in the UK. And they're doing a lot of work here, but also their biggest drug is a Chinese drug. And what they've done with it is phenomenal. And it shows what can be done with the UK and with China in high technology.
So what you're suggesting is that there is this geopolitical row going on up here between continents, but down here it's business as usual. People are just getting on with it.
I think the geopolitical situation has made people wary. So I think when business go there, they're trying to find out what is really possible. And as soon as you get there, you find out there's a hunger from the Chinese side to do trade and to do a lot of business, and we're seeing that.
Look, we've been talking about the here and now. Whatever China's plans, Europe and the United States perhaps say they look set to further tighten trade sanctions. So let's look into the future. Is life going to get more difficult for those UK businesses that you talk to doing business with China, and vice versa?
I think if you're looking at tariffs and you're looking at stance against China, it's a time where you think, okay, you can do that and you can make that position against China, but it's not going to make a huge difference. China going to continue, they're going to accelerate. And how does that help our economy? We're not in a good stance right now. We need to grow, and we're not doing so. So we need to look, where's investment coming into? You're looking at China as our 4th biggest trade nation in the world. So we need to find out where those policies are, how we can attract the investment, and how UK companies can explore working in partnership with other nations.
Few people make the argument that we need each other, do they? It's not a politically popular thing to say, but in business, it's so true, isn't it?
Well, you look at partnerships, one of the key partnerships around the world is China. So if you ignore it or you don't go there, you're taking a huge amount of access away from your companies. Companies here in the UK will benefit hugely to be able to do business in China because their focus is outward thinking and opening up and modernization right now.
While you and I are standing here, the UK Prime Minister, the new UK Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, the leader of the new Labour government, is hosting pretty much all of Europe's leaders at Blenheim Palace today, the birthplace of Churchill, of course. What should Europe's leaders make of this plenum and the message that comes out of China? They'll be watching, presumably.
Yeah, I think the whole world is watching right now what's coming out of China from the 3rd plenum. I think you've seen that Xi Jinping has talked about opening up modernization, innovation, reform in key areas. I think the connectivity of what China are trying to do match up to what we're trying to do here in the UK and countries around the world for openness. I think there's a lot of opportunities to be able to had. I think the benefits that have come out from the plenum today are actually somewhere where the companies can say, okay, there's possibilities to be able to go to China and work with China.
One of the key features of China's reforms has been foreign investment, particularly in infrastructure under the Belt and Road Initiative. A key project in Europe is Greece's Port of Piraeus, majority operated by China's COSCO since 2016. Dimitris Avramopoulos is a former Greek foreign minister.
The investment by COSCO at the Port of Piraeus has significantly contributed to the upgrade of the port, especially at a time when the broader region has changed. It serves as a point from which Chinese products can be forwarded to southeastern Europe and even northern Europe. This investment is functional, effective and beneficial for both sides, allowing us to open new chapters. I'm confident that the two countries' governments are taking advantage of this positive climate that has been created. Most importantly for me is the cultivation of mutual respect and trust. At a time when discussions sometimes lead to problematic relationships between global and regional players, these values are crucial for maintaining stability and fostering cooperation.
Chinese electric vehicles could prove pivotal for Thailand's economy as companies like China's BYD open up new car factories.
Thailand relies heavily on manufacturing, but nearly 2,000 factories closed in 2023. Our correspondent Desita Saukal reports.
It was once known as the Detroit of Asia, a title that reflected Thailand's dominant position in the automobile manufacturing sector, where the production of internal combustion engine vehicles was the heartbeat of progress. But the sounds of bustling factories and humming machinery have been replaced by an eerie silence as plants shut their doors one after another. It's a gloomy picture for Thai industries. Nearly 2,000 factory closures in the last year, an increase of 40% from the preceding 12 months. Job losses jumped by 80% during the same period, leaving more than 50,000 workers left without work.
We haven't been able to adapt in time, and the auto industry is an indicator that changes are occurring. No matter what, EVs are definitely coming. It's going to grow in an astounding way, by leaps and bounds, because it's a global trend.
On the outskirts of Thailand's car-making capital, Rayong, on the Eastern Economic Corridor, GAC Ion has opened its first factory in the country. Not far away, other Chinese companies are already building their EVs. This plant is part of a wave of investment worth more than $1.44 billion from Chinese EV manufacturers, fueled by government subsidies, tax incentives, and competitive market conditions, where more than 80% of EVs sold in Thailand last year were Chinese brands.
This brand new factory is GAC Ion's first overseas production facility outside of China. Not only will this factory benefit the local workforce, but will also bring in new advanced technologies that will help strengthen and develop Thailand's EV ecosystem and strengthen Thailand's position as the regional hub for EV production.
The Thai factory fully implements the ion production method, eliminating all waste, creating the ultimate in efficiency, cost, and quality, and applying the world's latest manufacturing technology, driving a new wave of technological innovation in automobile manufacturing.
Asia's Detroit is shedding its old skin and embracing the future. Once churning out gas-guzzling behemoths by the millions, it is now pivoting to become a hub for electric vehicles. And as environmental concerns and technology propel Thailand's auto industry forward, the transformation is not only playing out inside these factories, but everywhere on the streets. Lucita Saukal, CGTN, Rayong, Thailand.
China has named meat producers from Spain, the Netherlands and Denmark as targets of its anti-dumping investigation into European Union pork imports. China's Commerce Ministry announced it would start with a handful of companies as it continues an investigation launched last year. It comes amid trade tension between Beijing and Brussels as the EU considers provisional tariffs of up to 37% on Chinese-made electric vehicles.
Nokia shares have fallen by 8% after the company posted its lowest sales figures in nearly a decade. Second quarter profits were down 32%, which Nokia said was due to weak demand for 5G equipment. It said it expected sales to recover in the second half of the year.
Italian authorities say they've launched an investigation to the tech giant Google and its parent company Alphabet over allegations of misleading and aggressive commercial practices. The watchdog says the consent form sent to customers may not be clear on how the company, which offers email, maps and YouTube services, will use personal data. Google says it'll cooperate.
Shares in Volvo jumped 9% after it reported second quarter operating profits of $776 million. That's a 28% increase on the same period last year and the highest quarterly result ever. The Swedish car maker said retail sales of both hybrid and fully electric cars were up 15%.
The European Central Bank has kept interest rates unchanged. The decision to leave the benchmark rate at 3.75% was in line with market expectations, but the bank gave little indication of a rate cut in the coming months. The ECB said domestic price pressures remain high and inflation will be above its 2% target well into next year.
Over in the United States, the Nasdaq has opened higher after suffering its worst trading day since 2022. Let's talk to our correspondent, John Terrett. So, John, what's been going on?
Yes. Well, it's all just changed. Of course, you knew it would, and it has. Let me try and explain the story. TSMC stands for Taiwan Semiconductor. It's a very important microchip manufacturer, and it's important for several reasons here, mainly because it's based in Taiwan, which, as you know, is geopolitically sensitive at the moment, but also because it produces, I think, the bulk of the world's semiconductors, and also because here in America they are using US government money and subsidies and things and tax breaks, building, I think it's 3 facilities in the southwest of the country. I think they're focused actually in Arizona, which is very much in the southwest of this country. So when TSMC produces its latest set of earnings, people pay attention. And they were pretty good. They were okay. They beat Wall Street expectations, they raised their guidance, and they said that they did all this because there are so many government contracts from around the world now going to chip manufacturers and designers for AI that their earnings benefited because of that. Now, earlier this morning, we thought, well, that's great. That means the huge tech sell-off of yesterday, in which the Nasdaq was at its lowest for 2 years, is probably a one-day event prompted by that Bloomberg report about concerns about chip exports to China. Well, now, of course, typically, now that you've come over to me, it's all just changed direction in the last half hour or so. Taiwan Semiconductor shares are down 3%. ASML, which is the biggest supplier of equipment to chip makers around the world, based in the Netherlands, their shares are down just under 2% now. They were down 13% yesterday. Nvidia, on the other hand, is up 1% at the moment. So we kind of thought that was going to be a one-day event yesterday. Very, very bad day for tech stocks. It may or may not be. There's another 4 hours of trading to go here. At the moment, the Dow is down now by 0.8%. It was up earlier. The S&P 500 by the same percentage. It was up earlier. And the Nasdaq was up earlier as well, but is now down about 1%. Of course, it could all change at 4 o'clock this afternoon when Netflix gives us its earnings. Duflix, as we call them here, is one of the most important companies of our era. Wall Street looking for 5 million new subscribers in the last 3 months. If they put on 6 or 7, Netflix will go up and the whole thing will change again. But that's still 3 or 4 hours away. At the moment, we're in the red again today here on Wall Street, guys.
Well, John, let's leave Wall Street behind for one moment and head to Washington because the odds of Joe Biden withdrawing from the presidential race have just got much shorter. What are you hearing?
Yes. Well, I think we're on shifting sands, Robin, to be perfectly honest with you. I think probably something is about to happen in the next week or so. Literally, things cannot get worse for Joe Biden than they are at the moment. And, of course, it follows the disaster that was that opening debate with Donald Trump and the disaster that was the NATO press conference. 25 million Americans tuned into a NATO press conference, for goodness sake, to see how the president was getting on. And as you know, he didn't really cover himself in glory. The problem is he's 81 years old. Now he's got COVID. I think it's for the third time. He was on a campaign swing designed to counter the publicity that Trump is getting in Milwaukee with the Republican convention. He got COVID. They had to cancel all of that. He was walking very slowly down the steps of the aircraft on the East Coast last night. He was seen to be struggling to get into the car. The Democrats see the specter of President Trump in November, and they see Trump 2.0, and they are panicking. The big shots of the party are coming out and talking to President Biden, and it is having an effect. We are told that Chuck Schumer, who is the majority leader in the Senate, had a private meeting with him last weekend at the White House and said it would be best if he went. Chuck Schumer this morning, his office says that's idle speculation. Hakeem Jeffries, who is the minority leader in the House, has apparently said the same thing. Nancy Pelosi, the former speaker, has told him he can't win, and he's jeopardizing their chances of winning the House in November, apparently. And the biggest star so far is a man called Adam Schiff, who's a congressman from California, absolutely despised by Republicans, but worshipped by Democrats. He's told Biden, apparently, and he said this publicly, it's time to pass the torch. And he's very seriously concerned whether he can win in November or not. So this is all very serious stuff. The White House and Biden say, look, he's the nominee. He looks forward to working alongside all the people I've just mentioned going forward, although we are getting reports now that the president is at least receptive to some of the concerns. Finally, of course, the Republican convention wraps up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin tonight with President Trump accepting the nomination for the third time, remember. And they want to fight this election alongside Joe Biden. They don't want the Democrats to bring in anybody else. But all I can tell you now, it's 12:26 on Thursday lunchtime here, and it seems as if the Republicans are uniting and the Democrats are falling apart, and we are in very uncertain territory.
John, thank you very much. Our correspondent John Terrett in New York.
You're watching CGTN, still ahead.
Votes in favour, 401.
Ursula von der Leyen wins a second term as European Commission President.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
Well, China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us. And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
These people are the lucky ones. These migrants made the dangerous crossing to Europe in a small boat and were picked up by the Italian authorities. Many people who try to reach Europe have to be plucked from the sea when their boat capsizes or sinks.
This boat had around 30 people on board.
Hundreds of people desperately hoping for a new life in Europe. The thing is, there are huge amounts of people in Europe, particularly on the far right, do not want them on this continent.
Thousands of migrants allowed to enter without permission, who end up crowding out the slums of our towns and cities.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Don't let Putin blackmail you. That was Ukraine's president's warning to his allies as European leaders meet at the birthplace of Britain's wartime Prime Minister, Winston Churchill.
Vladimir Zelensky was speaking at the meeting of the European political community set up after the conflict between Russia and Ukraine began in 2022. Zelensky also wants greater freedom in how Ukraine's weapons from the West are deployed.
The more effective our air defense is, the more helpless Putin will be. The fewer restrictions we have on the use of effective weapons, the more Russia will seek peace.
Our correspondent Jen Copestake is at Blenheim Palace in Oxfordshire in England, where that meeting is being held. Jen, obviously Ukraine on the agenda. What else? What does the UK want to get out of this gathering?
Yes, Jamie, the UK is very much focused on illegal immigration today, and we can see that Keir Starmer is giving the closing press conference as we're coming to you live here at Blenheim Palace. He said that they need to bring the kind of resolve that they've brought to the conflict in Ukraine to another challenge, and this is what he called the vile trade of people smuggling. The Prime Minister said that this was an issue that very much affected all of the countries that were represented at the meeting here today, and that this is a challenge that they needed to face together. In fact, he said it was more than a challenge, it's now a crisis. And with this crisis, they need to find a new path forward on illegal migration to transform the way that they work together on border security, the way the European Union and the UK would work together on law enforcement. And indeed, this meeting has given the Prime Minister an excellent opportunity to meet with some key allies to push forward his plans on migration. This is just 2 weeks, of course, into his premiership. It's just days after he scrapped the Rwanda plan from the previous government. Of course, that was quite controversial. It would have involved moving asylum seekers to Rwanda for processing. The Prime Minister said the new government is not going to be involved in any of these, what he called gimmicks. That is behind now, but he needs the support of all of those who are gathered today to support him on his new UK border command that will be established with the aim of what he said was smashing criminal gangs. He very much brought into this conference the idea that he was a prosecutor. He was the top the public prosecutions for 5 years here in the UK, and that he was very much involved in smashing criminal gangs and using counter-terrorism measures while he was there, that he's very familiar with it, and he said he sees no way that they can't address this issue together, especially drawing on some of that experience. Now, Mr. Starmer also joined a meeting that was co-chaired between Italy and Albania. That was with the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni and the Albanian Prime Minister Edi Rama. Now, that was looking at the Italian-Albania deal where they're sending migrants from Italy to Albania for processing. And we understand that the Prime Minister is going to meet this evening with French President Emmanuel Macron over dinner, where they will discuss specifically the small boats crossing of the Channel. But we heard Emmanuel Macron spoke to a BBC reporter that was here saying that there was no silver bullet on this issue of the boats crossing the Channel. So that will be very fascinating to see what comes, if anything, out of that meeting tonight. Of course, the meeting today is taking place at Blenheim Palace. This is a historic birthplace of Winston Churchill. Both Ukrainian President Zelensky and the Prime Minister Keir Starmer said how important Winston Churchill was to both of them, to their political lives, and important especially on championing human rights. The Prime Minister took the opportunity to say that the UK would never leave the European Convention on Human Rights, and that was something that was so important to Winston Churchill that he worked on to achieve after the Second World War.
Keir Starmer also talked about Britain's post-Brexit relationship with Europe. What did he have to say?
Yes, he had a lot to say about the post-Brexit relationship with the EU, and he said he's very much about resetting that relationship, and that has been welcomed by all of the leaders here from across the European Union. We've heard various leaders giving their 2 cents on that. They seem extremely happy to see the new Prime Minister. The Irish Prime Minister Simon Harris said the new Labour government could be a game changer for UK-EU relations. We saw French President Emmanuel Macron saying this was an opportunity to reset also the relationship between France and the UK. And the Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez said they have the highest expectations of the new Prime Minister.
Jen, thank you for that. Our correspondent Jen Copestake at Blenheim Palace in Oxfordshire. Ursula von der Leyen has been re-elected as the president of the EU Commission for another 5 years. Ahead of the secret ballot, she promised to improve Europe's defence and security while standing up to extremism. Our correspondent Alex Cadier reports now from Brussels.
Investment.
This was Ursula von der Leyen's make-or-break moment. A speech that many said would seal her fate, as MEPs made up their minds about supporting her second term as European Commission President. Many thought the vote would be on a knife edge. In the end, von der Leyen got far more support than expected.
I cannot begin without expressing how much I am grateful for the trust and the confidence of the majority of the European Parliament.
Her speech was described as a European Christmas tree, with presents for all parts of the political spectrum. And it worked. New tougher migration laws and tripling the number of European border and coast guards, a gift for far-right parties like Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni's Brothers of Italy. Left-wing and Green parties were worried about being left out in the cold, but von der Leyen's speech will have reassured many. She won't compromise on Europe's green ambitions. But what about Europe's sluggish economy? Her own European People's Party wanted growth and competitiveness front and centre. Well, they too were on Ursula von der Leyen's gift list.
Our first priority will be prosperity and competitiveness. In the last 5 years, we have weathered the fiercest storm in our union's economic history. We have emerged stronger from the shock of lockdowns, and we have overcome an unprecedented energy crisis.
One person who won't be getting a Christmas card this year is Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban. Von der Leyen slammed his recent trip to Moscow, which drew the ire of many European leaders.
2 weeks ago, a European Union Prime Minister went to Moscow. This so-called peace mission was nothing but an appeasement mission. Only 2 days later, Putin's jets aimed their missiles at a children's hospital and maternity ward in Kyiv.
Ursula von der Leyen's wish list had the desired effect. She's back at the helm of the powerful European Commission for 5 more years. Her rebuke of Prime Minister Orban also shows that there are things she won't compromise on, and support for Ukraine is top of that list. This was Ursula von der Leyen's first big hurdle to clear. It was by no means a done deal just a few hours ago. But having promised a lot to everyone, she's now faced with the daunting task of having to deliver for an embattled Europe and a divided European Parliament. Alex Cadier, CGTN, Brussels.
Israel's Knesset has overwhelmingly voted to reject the establishment of a Palestinian state, claiming it would pose an existential danger to Israel.
Palestinian officials say this means the death of the historic Oslo peace accords agreed in the early 1990s and designed to set a path to peace in the region. Meanwhile, the Red Cross says hospitals in southern Gaza are at a breaking point due to the influx of injured people.
This comes as Israeli forces continue operations across the enclave. More than 80 people have been killed in the past 24 hours. Our correspondent Akram Al-Satari is in Gaza.
Well, the situation continues to be extremely catastrophic, and the bombardment has been reported in different parts of the Gaza Strip, and mainly in the Gaza Center area and Khan Yunis area, and also Rafah area, where bodies are still being collected, and also people who are injured because of the ongoing targeting in different parts of Rafah, and the ongoing destruction has been going on for the last few days. According to the Palestinian health sources, around 25 Palestinians were killed in different parts of the Gaza Strip since the morning. Some of them were killed in Al-Nusayrat area, some of them were killed in Al-Maghazi area in Gaza Central area, where around 6 Palestinians are still under the rubble. At least 4 children were retrieved from under the rubble. 1 whole family was killed, around 6 family members, and reports about different people killed Overall, 26 Palestinians were killed because of that bombardment. According to the Palestinian Ministry of Health, 56 Palestinians were killed in the last 24 hours. And also when it comes to the medical condition in the Gaza Strip, the situation of health facilities is extremely catastrophic. The Palestinian Ministry of Health have been appealing to the international community to step in and to provide solutions and answers to never-ending problems resulting from the continuous bombardment and continuous targeting of those health facilities. EGH, European Gaza Hospital, is still coming to a full disruption because of the bombardment and because of the evacuation orders that were provided to the people who are living in that area and the whole area of East Khan Yunis, leaving around 250,000 Palestinians displaced and fearful of any Israeli ground operation starting in that area. Palestinians also have been extremely frustrated when they hear the Knesset decision, the Israeli parliament decision, not to recognize a Palestinian state on the soil of Israel like was described, or that's just near Israel.
Well, let's get more on that vote in the Knesset rejecting Palestinian statehood. Joe Federman is from the Associated Press in Jerusalem.
This is largely a symbolic move at this point. It doesn't carry any formal meaning, but it does send a message. The Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, is heading to Washington this week. One of the issues, one of the big issues on the agenda is going to be, what is Israel's plan for after this war? And the U.S. wants to see two-state solution movement toward Palestinian statehood as part of that post-war plan. So what the parliament has done here is send a very powerful message to Washington that Israel does not want that to be part of Gaza's future. So Israel's positioning itself, and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is positioning himself for what will likely be a difficult conversation with the White House.
Israeli forces have targeted a militant leader in Lebanon a day after Hezbollah warned that it would expand its attacks. What more do we know?
Well, on the sidelines of this Gaza war, Israel has been fighting on a second front almost since the beginning of this war. Most of the fighting, the vast majority of the fighting, has been against the Hezbollah militant group Hezbollah. But there are other smaller groups inside Lebanon that are affiliated or allied with Hezbollah. Hamas has some forces in Lebanon. The militant who was killed today, we're hearing mixed reports, may have been affiliated with Hamas, maybe with a second group known as the Islamic group in Lebanon. But these are all groups that are working together with Hezbollah fighting Israel. The big picture, of course, is that this fighting is going on almost every day, and there's a constant risk. For the most part, it's been contained within a certain area close to the borders of each country, but there's this constant risk that this fighting could spin out of control and really lead to the eruption of a second front and perhaps even spill over to other parts of the Middle East.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. He won't need feeding. Man's best friend just got better as Chinese scientists develop a new robotic guide dog for the blind.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
Well, China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us. And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories: industrial modernisation and more market freedom China sets out its plans for the next 5 years. Our other headlines: in the United States, the Nasdaq opens higher after suffering its worst trading day since 2022. And Israel's parliament votes to reject Palestinian statehood as deadly IDF attacks continue across Gaza.
Now it's got more legs than a dog and won't need feeding. A robot developed by Chinese scientists could replace man's best friend to help blind people. China has more than 17 million people with sight impairment, but there are only around 400 guide dogs. It costs around $27,000 to train a guide dog and 20 months until it's partnered with a blind person. The robotic version could help more people more quickly and also boost China's robotics market. The industry is set to grow from $6.6 billion last year to almost $12 billion by 2032. Well, this dog's been developed by scientists in Shanghai. It uses the latest artificial intelligence technology and it has 6 legs. Our correspondent Michael Voss reports.
When Staihu Wei, who is blind, took part in the torch relay for the opening of the 2023 Asian Para Games in China, she was guided by a 4-legged robot dog. The robot worked well on this flat surface, but has limitations.
Most robotic dogs on the market have 4 legs that step in pairs, leaving them balancing on 2 legs at any time. This makes them unstable.
Now scientists at Shanghai's Jiaotong University have developed a 6-legged robot dog, which is more stable than the 4-legged version. Field tests are now underway for these 6-legged robots, which can communicate as well as walk. It uses artificial intelligence technology for voice recognition. Its camera can detect when an obstacle is in the way, and with 6 legs, the robot is stable, going up and down stairs.
For now, I can tell it where I'm going through voice conversations. I can control the speed with this blind cane. If I need it to go faster, I just push it all the way forward. If I need it to slow down, I just pull it back and it will adjust its speed.
Unlike real guide dogs, this artificial dog also has route planning capabilities. The machine can navigate using its cameras and sensors, including recognizing traffic lights.
There are only more than 400 guide dogs in service in China. We have nearly 20 million blind people. It is impossible to solve this problem with guide dogs. Robots are a lot like cars, and we can mass produce them in the same way as cars. It'll become more affordable.
There's still a long way to go before such robots become readily available, and while they might not be as cute as real guide dogs, the hope is that in the near future these robot companions could become a good substitute for the animal called man's best friend. Michael Voss, CGTN.
Well, let's talk now to Zhang Shixi, who's from the Department of Computer Science at Binghamton University in New York State. Welcome to the programme. Good to see you. So we heard a little bit in our report there about how these robot dogs work, but how can they really recognise things like traffic lights, for example, and stop their owners walking into a busy road?
Recognizing the objects, including traffic light signals, is generally called like a object recognition problem within the computer vision context. So this is a sub-area of artificial intelligence where AIs and robotics are doing pretty well. And AIs are using something called deep neural networks, and particularly called convolutional neural networks to recognize objects and understanding the environment. And under some conditions, AI and robots can do better than even naive people. But within this robotic guide dog context, robots actually need more than object recognition to understand the road is safe or not for navigation and other activities. So this is an exciting area, and still a lot of research is needed.
So it sounds like there's a little bit more work to be done, but I mean, can they really match up to regular guide dogs? What's the differences between them?
Traditional guide dogs has a long history, more than maybe 100 years, and there's evidence that They are very useful for helping people navigate safely and efficiently in everyday environment and improve their independence and safety. But training real guide dogs is costly and time consuming. After more than $100,000 of training cost, still only maybe half of the dogs can graduate. So for robots, and we see a lot of advances, say locomotion, quadruped that can safely navigate everyday environment, and perception, the robot can understand the everyday environment, and also the hardware cost is reduced a lot in the past 5 to 10 years. So robotics researchers are thinking about using robotic guide dogs as an alternative of the traditional guide dogs. And they can visually perceive the environment, they can safely navigate the environment, but still a lot of work needs to be done.
So what about the people using guide dogs? How difficult is it for a blind person to get used to working with a robot like this?
This is a very open question because we don't have a long history of research on robotic guide dogs, but we can talk a bit about traditional guide dogs. After the guide dogs graduate from training center, it takes about 2 weeks for the human user, visually impaired people, to work with the guide dogs as a co-training process before the visually impaired person can independently use a guide dog. So as a robotics researcher, we hope to reduce this 2 weeks of training time to maybe a couple of days because robots can actively adapt to human preferences and human walking styles. So this is a new topic. This is a new area. We are pretty hopeful about shortening this time to maybe a couple of days.
Zhang Shishi from Binghamton University, thank you very much for joining us on the programme today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, as French police lock down Paris, athletes begin arriving at the newly built Olympic Village ahead of next Friday's opening ceremony.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The clean-up operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So now we've actually become the border on this road.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
The focus is firmly on future technologies.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. Police in Paris have begun locking down parts of the city in preparation for the opening ceremony of the Olympics next week.
The first athletes have also started to arrive in the newly built Olympic Village, which will house almost 15,000 Olympians and staff. Our correspondent Ken Brown reports.
Athletes began arriving early on Thursday at the brand new Eco Quarter in Saint-Denis, northern Paris, where all buildings under 8 floors are made from wood and glass. Balconies decked out with flags of the countries who are staying in those buildings. Some 16,000 mattresses are available in various sizes and densities, while there's a huge 24-hour, 3,000 square meter gym packed out with 350 machines. That's 24 hours. The energy is all sustainable via heat pumps and renewables, but without that, of course, part of the pledge to make these the greenest games ever, but no air conditioning. Many teams bringing their own just in case. Now, there's a giant canteen area boasting some 200 chefs, 500 recipes, a pharmacy, a medical centre, massage space. There's even a hair salon here with a catalogue of 20 hairdos uniquely designed for athletes because, hey, Olympians are here to play their part, but they also want to look the part. Now, with Olympians on French soil, the games are starting to feel real. The excitement is growing. Some teams were already here, including the Olympic refugee athlete team, for example. 36 athletes from 11 countries representing millions of refugees and displaced people worldwide. The Olympic and Paralympic Games run to September 8th, and afterwards these buildings will become housing for 6,000 people, office space for another 6,000, with between 32 and 48% going to social housing, all part of the regeneration and investment in Saint-Denis, northern Paris, a 30-minute train ride from the centre of the city. Now, this village has been built on 128 acres of former wasteland, and it'll now host the heroes waiting to write their own page of Olympic history. Ken Brown, CGTN, Paris.
Well, Paris is connecting every Olympic venue to a new network of cycle lanes. The city wants to encourage people to use 2 wheels rather than 4 when they visit for the Summer Games. Our correspondent Ross Cullen reports.
This is now the second favourite way for Parisians to commute behind walking. A new report shows more people travel by bike than car because it's quicker. And visitors to the French capital for the Olympics are being advised to consider 2 wheels where possible. Metro and buses are also an option. However, some metro stations near Olympic venues will be closed, meaning that hopping on a bike should be one of the smoothest ways to get around during the Olympics. But the cycle lanes have not escaped the impact of Paris 2024. Traffic jams, diversions and the closure of cycle lanes are problems that have been part of the daily life of Parisian riders for weeks. Luckily, the Olympic preparations didn't force me to change my routine, but it did affect my colleague. She usually cycles along the Seine riverside bike lanes. Well, they are now closed to the public. Paris does have plenty of bike lanes, and it's starting to be more bike-friendly, as you can see here, but it's no Amsterdam or Copenhagen yet. Plus here, many cyclists don't respect road rules, such as stopping at red lights. From just 200 kilometres in 2001, cyclists now have more than 1,000 kilometres of tailor-made bike paths, often concreted off from the rest of the road. These separated lanes provide greater safety for cyclists. Velib is a bike-for-hire scheme that started in Paris in 2007. There are also private companies like Lime and Dot providing thousands of bikes to meet growing demand. And if cycling in Paris needed another boost, in just 1 week's time, the men's and women's Olympic road cyclists will be racing around this city. Ross Cullen, CGTN, Paris.
The headlines again. Industrial modernisation and more market freedom. China sets out its plans for the next 5 years.
Our other headlines: in the United States, the Nasdaq opens higher after suffering its worst trading day since 2022.
And don't let Putin blackmail you. Ukraine's president warns his allies as European leaders meet at the birthplace of Britain's wartime Prime Minister, Winston Churchill.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow. Same time, same place. From all of the team here in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.